I'm actually looking at everything going on in NAR right now. I'm looking at this more in a positive light. I think you have to get better, not only as a real estate agent in general, whether you work with sellers, buyers, both tenants, landlords, you might do a little bit of everything like I do. But I think this encourages buyer agents to get better at their craft. Because the better you are as a buyer agent, and if you're going to go buy a house, what's my job? My job is to educate you. Okay, before we go look at 123 Main Street, before we go look at that and I take you through and you figure out whether or not you want to buy it, let me tell you about how commissions are paid. Because this conversation wasn't really had before because the commission was already advertised.
Yeah.
And then maybe when you and I would go out to look at the house, you're like, hey, how do I pay you? I'm like, you don't. The seller pays me. You're like, oh my gosh, even better. Because guess what? I'm a buyer and they probably have more money than me in general. I'm not saying that's every time, but more times than not, they probably have wealth. Welcome to the podcast dedicated to real estate, insurance, and everything in between. Join us as we take you along our own brokerage building journeys with additional wisdom from our network of business experts. Welcome to Bricks and Risk. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Bricks and Risk. I'm Tim Garrity.
And I'm Sean Mooney. Tim, a lot of scuttlebutt out there these days about real estate. It's on my feed everywhere I go.
Yeah, it is. It's everywhere.
NAR,
It's very trendy.
NAR. What is going on?
Okay, well, if you haven't noticed, Sean and I decided to rock the stylist Copper Hill real estate trucker hats today.
I went with orange.
Yeah, and the orange is tight. We got to be straight up.
Is that a flyer orange?
It is. It's supposed to be copper, but let's call it flyers.
Brent and D'Amico would be very happy with it right now.
All right, so NAR, the National Association of Realtors.
Yeah.
First, it's the largest trade organization in the United States. That's number one. The highest it ever got was probably about 1.6 million members, which was last year. And then when the market started to kind of tighten up in residential real estate last year, people started getting out of the business. The National Association of Realtors, too, the reason they're the largest trade organization is they basically oversee not only all the state associations. So you have National Association of Realtors. Each state has their own association. So again, Pennsylvania, we have PAR. And then in the states, you also have regional, like hyper-local organizations that cater to that group of agents. So here's a great example. In Greater Philadelphia, we'll go more hyper-local. There's technically 3 groups of realtor associations in and around Philadelphia. You have Tri-County Suburban Realtors, which is out in Malvern. You have one in Bucks County called Bucks County Association of Realtors, and then you have the Greater Philadelphia Association of Realtors called GPAR. That's in the city. So you pretty much have 3 groups all servicing the same people, realtors. So there was a humongous lawsuit that just went down. It took about 4 years to get through the legal system. And what it was a class action suit against the National Association of Realtors, as well as some of the larger brokerage companies in the country, just because they handled the bulk of the sales and they were easy targets, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And more or less, not to get too technical, the lawsuit was going against them, suing them to say that the way commissions were paid in real estate was antitrust, was monopolistic, was unfair, was price fixing, is how they looked at it.
Yeah.
And then after all was said and done, there's multiple lawsuits stacking up all over the country. One of the major ones that went through, it was in the state of Missouri. They won, the plaintiffs won, and it was going to be upwards of $5 billion.
Is that all?
That's all. Well, what happened is after that went down, lots of settlements started taking place. One of them was the National Association of Realtors. They fought this tooth and nail. In the end, they said, look, we're just going to stop the bleeding. We're going to settle this lawsuit. And again, hasn't been finished yet, hasn't closed. This proposed settlement, $418 million, they're going to pay out as a result of this.
But they're not paying and going away. They're paying and then changing
Right.
how business is transacted with realtors.
Yeah, I mean, there's lawsuits all the time. Facebook gets sued, Google gets sued. I mean, there's all sorts of big companies that get sued all the time. It's because for whatever reason, they're doing business in a way that that government doesn't agree with. And then that's why these things ensue. This $418 million is part of a class action. So the attorneys that were involved are going to make a ton of money.
Yep.
And then sellers, people who sold real estate within a certain period of time, are going to get a piece of that class action pool of money.
Will that be me? Am I getting a check?
You know what? I think you might have sold prior to. And if you've been part of a class action before, someone says, hey, you can make $150. Did you have a Droid in 2018? Because if you did, you may be entitled to $75. I'm like, that would make sense because it's a pretty cheap phone.
Can I sue NAR myself if I'm not part of this class action lawsuit?
You can do whatever the hell you want. I know
Might be an angle there.
I know attorneys. That's basically what's happening.
So are you a member of NAR directly or your company? What's the structure of that? Or are you a member of the regional membership that then they're a member of the NAR? Like, how does it work that way?
The simplest way to put it is that if you're a realtor, you're a member of all three.
No.
So you have to associate with a local association because they're more like your partners. They're like helping you out through your business because, again, we're all independent contractors.
Yeah.
So they're like a local support system.
Right.
I also belong to the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors because they are the ones responsible for our paperwork. So you've bought real estate, like the agreement of sale, the consumer notice, buyer agency contract, like seller's disclosure, like that's all written by PAR. And then I'm also a member of the National Association of Realtors because you have to be. They're the governing body. So I would say between the three bodies that I'm a part of, it's probably like, I don't know, $600-700 a year to be a member of all three.
So you pay each of them?
That's for all three. Very cheap.
Now, I'm curious, so this has been going on for 4 years.
Yep.
I'm curious because it feels like it came out of the blue, but I'm sure that there was some speaking of this prior to the release.
Absolutely. This has been in the forefront of my industry. This is really residential real estate. Try not to just get this confused with people are selling office buildings or industrial warehouses or doing leasing and like in Center City, Philadelphia. Like this doesn't really have much to do with them. They already operate on a different model. If you're in commercial, you operate on a different model. If you're in residential, chances are you are a realtor and you operate under this structure.
And can you talk about the 6%, because they're saying that it was price fixing.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how it is currently and like how it's divvied up and how that's paid out?
Yeah, so I think the number that most people associate with selling real estate is that it costs me 6% of my purchase price to sell my home, let's say, or my investment property, my condo, whatever it is. The reason that is, it's been around that range for probably, if I had to guess, about 50 years or so. What people don't talk about is that in the last couple decades, that number has consistently gone down from 6 on average to somewhere closer to 5% to sell a piece of real estate. Reason being, there's more competition. There's more realtors, there's more brokerages, there's more ways to do business, obviously advertising on the internet and social media. Everything's more reliant on the agent now these days. Like us as solo practitioners, whether you're a solo agent or on a team, like it's really up to you how well you want to market a listing. The brokerage doesn't do that for you. The brokerage is basically the house that gives you cover, gives you support, gives you insurance, like protects you, makes you comfortable. Plus, they also have training, they have marketing, they have a brand, whatever. But today, the agent really runs the show. And that 6% was always out there just as like a general rule of thumb. That's what it costs. But to keep it more boots on the ground, like you have sold real estate before. I've sold real estate with people within our network. And when I go out to them, I would, traditionally say, you've probably heard 6% before. For most of my friends and family, ever since I've been in the business, I have been usually selling for about 5%, meaning if I put it on the market and there's another agent involved, which 9 times out of 10 there is, my brokerage would get 2.5%. That brokerage would get 2.5%. That's the best way I can explain that 6%. Like, what is it? Why is it? And what's interesting about this whole thing, if I can just kind of like be on the side of agents, is that when this lawsuit happened, they kind of made it seem like commissions were non-negotiable. Because when it comes down to price fixing, they're looking at it as like everyone is like collaborating together and conspiring together so that 6% never moves.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, like, what were some of the cases that spurred this? I think there were like higher end sales. So think about it. You're selling something for like $10 million out in California or New York. I mean, 6% or 5% of $10 million is a ton of money. And there's agents who run their business all different ways. Some do it relationship based, some do it transaction based. Sometimes you're more transactional. You don't care if it goes well or if it goes poorly, because you're like, I just want to get this deal done, get paid, and move on. Yeah. You asked me to sell your house, I'm getting it done.
Yeah.
The people who are more relationship focused, again, this is just my own personal professional opinion, they look at it differently. How do we both benefit? How do I set your expectations properly? It's more about the customer support. It's more about the service, so that when you're done, you can say, would you mind giving me an online review? Would you mind telling friends and family or people in your network about me? And if you ever have another need, if you want an investment property, you ever want to sell this place, you ever want to buy a house at the shore up in the Poconos, like, make me your first call.
Yeah.
And that's how I've always operated.
I was reading in the New York Times recently.
Yeah.
And said that this 6% model, the commission structure, is going away. Gone.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's not.
No.
So my opinion, again, this is all opinion based. So please not take, besides some of the numbers I dropped.
If they're tuning in, they know that this is our opinion.
This is our opinion.
No disclaimer needed.
When the seller, there's part of the reason why I feel like the sellers have traditionally paid for real estate commissions. Who's wealthier in a real estate transaction? Traditionally, who would have more assets or more money? The person selling the house or the person buying the house? More times than not, as real estate is the number one wealth builder in the United States of America, look it up, by a big margin over the stock market. More people have realized wealth in America through real estate than crypto, than the stock market. Therefore, if it's one of the biggest wealth builders, when you go to sell it, chances are you have more money than the buyer. But what happened is, like, back in like the 70s and stuff, like, you know, they would pay commission and it would all go to the listing agent. Like, there would be no buyer agent. It'd be like, you go to the listing agent, you buy the house. Guess what? They know the seller better than you. And you're probably not going to get great customer service. Plus, they're making a lot of money. So they just want to see the deal done. Mm-hmm. It was more about sales. It wasn't until the 90s where, especially in Pennsylvania, that we introduced, you know, cooperation. We said, hey, if it's 6%, if it's 5%, if it's 4%, it doesn't matter what it is. You should split that. You should advertise. I'm going to put 2% out there, 2.5%, 3% to a buyer agent. And back to your original question, why will this not go away? It's a competitive advantage for the seller, a competitive edge to offer a commission to the buy side so that the buyer doesn't have to pay. They probably have less money. Also, you're going to get more eyes on your property. So the more demand there is for your home, if you have a pool of 5 buyers, you're going to get 5 opinions. If you have a pool of 5,000 buyers, you're going to get lots of different opinions as to whether you're priced too high, too low, or just right. So real estate is supply and demand. And the reason that commission I don't think will go away is because I think the majority of sellers, the number I've used, I think 75% of sellers are still going to pay 5 to 6% on average. And the reason being is they want that competitive edge. They want to get the highest price for their home. They don't just want one office of 100 agents to look at it and be like, does anyone have a buyer? That's not enough people. They want to put it out to Greater Philadelphia, be like, of the 10,000 agents, does someone have a buyer? That's what they want.
I saw recently somewhere it was put kind of like this, where if you're representing a buyer and then the agent would go to them and say, hey, listen, buyer client, how do you want to do this deal?
Yeah.
And they said, do you want us to look at only homes that had an offer, because if the seller wasn't going to pony up the money, and then let's just say, for example, that it would be the obligation of the buyer agent to absorb that cost.
To pay for that. Pay their agent for representation.
Right. So they would say, hey, buyer client, do you want to either like look at, you want to pony up that price right now? Like,
then we can look at anything.
Look at anything. Or we can only selectively look at these listings that were seller was offering the commission. So for me, it's like, you know, if I'm the buyer client, you know, or if I'm the seller, I want as many people through this door as possible.
You want as many eyes on your property as possible.
And I'm willing to give up. Now, people might have different opinions about what they're willing to give up. But I think just on the level, everybody's willing to pay something to get more traffic through the home.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be 3 different ways commissions will be paid. Moving for July 2024 is when these new rules are supposed to be enacted. Okay. The first major rule that's being enacted, they're forcing the National Association of Realtors to do this, is that local MLSs, local multiple listing services, are what advertise properties in any market. Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, Texas, El Paso. I've mentioned El Paso before, haven't I? I don't know why I do that. But
listening block down there
exactly.
in El Paso.
And if you're from El Paso, I love you. So being that the MLSs control local markets of real estate, meaning if you're going to sell your home, you want an agent to put on the MLS. So that gets all the eyeballs on it. Gets the eyeballs of agents. It also shifts out to sites like Zillow and Realtor.com and all these other consumer-facing sites where you can see that as well. So being that's the case, they don't want NAR or MLSs to advertise buyer broker commissions. It was part of the reason why this lawsuit went down. Because listing agents used to advertise buyer broker commissions, it was almost guaranteed. So if you came in with your buyer agent and let's say that buyer agent wasn't even that good. So let's say that buyer agent was brand new and they're taking you through the house. They're going to still pay 2.5%, 3% to that buyer agent, whether they're good or not. So I think the thought was that that's kind of unfair. Why are we forcing commissions if the person's not that good? What if the service isn't that good? So the one rule they said, can't advertise on the MLS anymore. Okay, that was rule number 1. People will find a way to get the word out that their seller will pay or their seller won't pay. So that's where these 3 ways come in. After July 2024, when this goes down, it's either the seller can pay the buyer agent's commission, the buyer can pay the buyer agent's commission, or they can both pay the buyer agent's commission, meaning maybe the buyer pays $500 or 1%, and the seller will pay a couple points. Whatever it is, now there's different ways to get it done. I actually think that's a good thing.
And that's like a negotiation?
Negotiation. And the thing is,
would that be, hey, I'm submitting my offer and this is...
Yes, that's part of it.
I mean, I think about it now and the crazy things that are being offered now. I mean, a couple of years ago it was like, can't buy a house without a home inspection. And then nobody gets a home inspection. Like the way that these changes get enacted, where it's 180 degrees, I think there's people going to say that won't happen, or, it absolutely will happen.
Yeah. And I think what I like about this, I'm actually looking at everything going on in NAR right now. I'm looking at this more in a positive light. I think you have to get better, not only as a real estate agent in general, whether you work with sellers, buyers, both tenants, landlords, you might do a little bit of everything like I do. But I think this encourages buyer agents to get better at their craft. Because the better you are as a buyer agent, and if you're going to go buy a house, what's my job? My job is to educate you okay, before we go look at 123 Main Street, before we go look at that, and I take you through and you figure out whether or not you want to buy it, let me tell you about how commissions are paid. Because this conversation wasn't really had before because the commission was already advertised.
Yeah.
And then maybe when you and I would go out to look at the house, you're like, hey, how do I pay you? I'm like, you don't. The seller pays me. You're like, oh my gosh, even better. Because guess what? I'm a buyer and they probably have more money than me in general. I'm not saying that's every time, but more times than not, they probably have wealth. So with that being the case, now we just have to figure out how the commission gets paid.
You say wealth. I say liquid money. You're more liquid.
The more liquid. Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Wealth is not ever.
Who's got the cash?
Right.
And whoever has the cash is kind of writing the rules.
Yeah.
That's why they say cash is king.
I say Bitcoin, but other people say cash.
If you didn't know already, Mooney is a huge crypto guy.
I'm a Bitcoin.
Very much behind the scenes, but if you sit down with him and talk about crypto, this dude's like making retirement plans.
Bitcoin maximalist is what they call me.
Hey everyone, this is Tim, your favorite Bricks and Risk co-host. But don't tell Sean. I hope you're enjoying this episode, and I'll get right back to it in a moment. Our audience grows through word of mouth, so if you would please take a moment of your time and give us a review on the platform you're on, that would be fantastic. Please also help spread the B&R word by sharing your favorite episode with a friend. We greatly appreciate your time and trust. Now, back to the show.
Well, let's get down. So when this comes through, who's it really impacting and who's the winner in all of this? Or who's the design to be the winner in all of this?
So when this happens, there's a class action lawsuit where the plaintiff won, the defendant lost, the National Association of Realtors, as well as large brokerages throughout the U.S. I don't even need to name them, just go look them up. We're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars is going to this class action suit. It goes to the lawyers who got this thing done. They get money for their time. And it goes to home sellers who bought homes or who sold homes within a certain period of time. So the loser in this scenario with these rules, what I have read, if you read stuff on mainstream media about this, they're like, this is a more consumer-friendly model that we're going into. I'm not going to say that's untrue, but I will say it favors sellers because now the seller holds the cards. Oh, if I paid 5% before to sell my house, maybe I only offer 2.5% now. So I pay less, whether I get less buyers or not.
Yeah.
So the sellers are technically going to benefit. The buyers will not benefit. And if you ask me, I actually think that's the part of the market that needs the most help. I mean, if you're a first-time home buyer, let's say you're just getting started in your life. Like I bought my first house when I was 24. I was young when I bought my first house.
You didn't know everything about real estate back then.
I didn't know anything. I mean, I was in the mortgage business, so I was learning. I was only doing it for a year and a half. And here's how I put together my first sale. So I'm living in Manioc, Roxborough, which is where we're recording right now. I'm renting with friends from high school and college, and I'm doing well in the mortgage business. I'm like, I'm going to go buy a house. But in order for me to consider that, I could have gone and bought like a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, like condo or something like that. I bought a 3-bedroom townhome, basically. The reason I did that is because I had 2 friends that said, we'll pay you rent if you buy that house, because we're all like early 20s. I was like, yes. So I became a landlord. That is how I bought my first house. That is how I succeeded with my first house. Because guess what? After my buddies moved out, I met Maria. We got engaged. She moved in. And now it's the 2 of us there, and we have 2 incomes. So like buying your first house is an extremely difficult thing to do. The largest base of buyers right now are millennials. Most millennials are not even buying their homes until they're in their 30s now. Why? It's unaffordable. You need too much money. The prices are too high. You got some rental situation. You're just like, I'm just going to keep renting because I'm putting more money in the bank. So it's almost unaffordable to buy right now. And now the interest rates have gone up. It makes it harder for buyers. This is one more thing, in my opinion, against the buying community that's going to make it harder for them to buy.
Our listeners in El Paso are going to have a hard time with Manioc. Can you spell that out for us?
And the funny thing is, this joke about El Paso, nothing against El Paso. We brought that up in a past episode, and it was just so super random on my end that now it's becoming a running joke.
Argentina,
But Manioc, if you got a Philly accent, you probably don't understand what I'm saying right now. It's Manayunk, Manayunk. which actually is Native American for, I think it's the place we go to drink.
That would make sense.
How'd you like that for a fact?
I've bought homes before. What's the most valuable piece of the equation when buying, when you have the buyer's agent?
I would
Like
say
if we're trying to make the case for, hey, listen,
Yep.
you know, the buyer's agent in this deal are getting cut out.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Everything, all the chips go to the side of the seller. Tell us about the value and what's needed when we're talking about the buyer agent.
The biggest value to having a buyer agent in residential or commercial real estate is you have a licensed agent looking out for you and your interest only. Like they are your fiduciary. There's a contract that says what they owe you: confidence, obedience, disclosure, liability. Like there's lots of things that come with being a fiduciary in real estate. The best analogy I can give, let's say that there's a plaintiff is suing someone and there's a defendant. So that attorney's helping the plaintiff. Let's go sue this person because you had a problem with them. But then let's say once they get sued, that attorney that you had sue them goes over to the defendant and says, hey, can I help you too? You want me to represent your interests? So who does the attorney know better? They know the plaintiff, the person who's suing. Just like when you sell real estate, who does the listing agent know better? The seller or the buyer? They know the seller because they already met the seller. They already signed an agreement. They already said, I'm going to help you sell your home. They're going to take pictures, put a lockbox up, put a sign up. They're going to market it. And then a buyer comes to them and says, can you help me? Who does that listing agent know better? They know the seller. So therefore, if you go through that agent as a buyer, not only is that person traditionally making more money, but they know the seller better than they know you. Plus, how can they give you both fiduciary representation if there's two of you? If there's two of you, they almost have to be neutral. I can count on one hand how many times I've done dual agency in my life in a sale, in a residential real estate sale, and it's super awkward. Like there's no good way to do it. It's a conflict of interest. How am I supposed to tell a buyer what's good for them? You inspect the home and you're like, yo, what should I do? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want to do? And you're like, well, you should be telling me, what did you see?
Advising.
What's your advice? So you can't really advise as a dual agent because, again, if you're giving advice to the buyer, it's going against the seller. You give advice to the seller, it goes against the buyer. So the real advantage of having a buyer agent, that agent is looking out for your interests and your interests only. It doesn't matter who's paying the money. So whether the seller pays it or you pay it or you both pay it, they're still your fiduciary in a contract. Like you signed a buyer agency contract because you trust that person and you're like, help me get to where I'm going. Like most people don't understand real estate. You do it every 5 years, 15, 50 years.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what you're doing, you need a guide. That's why there are realtors. That's why they have a job. It doesn't happen that often. Like a good realtor only sells maybe like 2 dozen, 3 dozen homes in a year. You're in the top 5% of realtors nationwide if you do that. And you're doing like 25, 30 transactions. Like just think about that. Some people sell hundreds of homes in a year, 1,000 homes in a year. They're just like machines with people under them. Yeah. So it's a totally different model. The high majority of real estate agents only sell like a home or a couple homes a year. And even they aren't that good. So to get back to your point about the buyer agent, where I think this is a benefit, I think there's some people that are in real estate who are unfortunately are just not very good at what they do because they don't do it enough. It's a part-time gig. And if you went to a part-time agent versus a full-time agent like me, someone who's running a team of agents, who would you rather work with? If it costs you the same amount of money or the seller the same amount of money, you're probably going to want the person with experience.
So you're saying
better value
over time, once this gets implemented, if and how and when it shakes out, is that this is going to remove real estate professionals from the marketplace.
Yeah, and here's a great way to put it. On average, last couple decades, around 4 million or so homes move a year. There were 1.6 million realtors.
Less than.
So just think, it's like each realtor on average can sell 2 to 3 homes a year. That's not a career. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Back in 2008, when the financial meltdown happened, it affected real estate drastically. If you owned real estate at that time, like you took a huge hit. There were, I think, 1.2 million realtors back then. When all the dust settled in 2012, which the market started to tick up again, there were probably like 800,000 realtors. We're at like 1.5. It needs to thin out. Unfortunately, that's just my opinion. I'm not saying that to be rude, and I'm not saying that to say that
supply demand.
Yeah, it's not even saying that I know the answers. It's just, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in this business. If you don't do it full time, you're just not really going to ever truly get great at it. And buyers and sellers typically want agents who are great. It's the biggest transaction you do in your life. So who can I work with that's actually great at what they do, especially if I'm paying you now?
Yeah.
So I think this is a good thing for the buying community. Once it happens, they're going to be more selective about who they work with rather than working with their cousin or their neighbor, or their coworkers like, oh, I got a real estate license, I'll help you. It's not to say they couldn't help you, but maybe they weren't very good at what they did.
Another thing I'm seeing is that there's certain brokerages or real estate realtors that are a part of this.
Yeah.
And some that aren't.
Yeah.
Where is the line being drawn in terms of
why are the big companies being brought in?
Yeah. Or why are some not even a part of this?
Yeah. I mean, I run an independent brokerage. We're only a team of about 30 plus. So the reason, again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not an expert. All I know.
Dylan, put a little thing at the bottom here to say we're not lawyers.
Tim is not an attorney. That's going to be very helpful. And have it like scroll across like 1995 style.
And we'll get a crypto wallet address for donations. And
then when Mooney opens up his flip phone, it'll look just as cool then too. So basically, what was the question again?
Some people are a part of this, and some people are not.
Sorry, folks. So when the lawsuits were going down, they went after the bigger companies because they controlled a bigger part of the market, and therefore they have more money. So they're like, if we're going to get money out of this, go after the big guys and girls. Sure. What's an interesting statistic, and I haven't checked this in a few years, is that you think about there's large brokerages. I'm just going to name some of them, like Keller Williams or Coldwell Banker, Remax, Compass, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, some of the larger brokerages in the country. Then there's Copper Hill. Copper Hill is a smaller independent brokerage, and we're not a franchise. Most of the brokerages in the U.S., the majority of them, more than 50%, are actually just like me.
What's that number?
The majority, I think it's like just over 50%, are independently owned real estate brokerages. Again, residential real estate.
I wouldn't have thought that, but.
And less than that are controlled by the large companies.
Yeah.
So to your point, I think they went after the large companies because they know they could settle. I mean, a lot of the large companies settled for like 50 million, 80 million on top of the 418 million that they're getting.
Oh, really?
This is why this adds up to like close to $1 billion so far, and we're not done. And then when NAR settled, they actually protected my company. They said, look, we settled to protect members that we felt needed protection, and they're the smaller brokerages. So when they settled, they said, look, Copper Hill, like, you're not a part of this anymore. But then there's still big brokerages out there battling right now. Berkshire Hathaway is one of them, and nothing against them. It's just they're still in the mix because they're a beast. And that's why. So to answer your question, is because they were large, had deep pockets, and they knew they could go after that to make money in the class action suit. That's just my opinion.
Can I give you my proprietary
I would love that.
Solution?
Yes.
In talking with, and I'm not a realtor. You can put Dylan.
Another note sliding across.
To me, as a buyer, I'm going to want to work with an agent. I need to be guided. I need someone's expertise. This is the biggest purchase I'm ever going to make.
Yep.
That needs to happen. I need to have an agent. I need to have representation.
If it were me and I wasn't licensed, I would agree.
I don't want the seller to represent me. Right. So at the end, I'm going to have to
call. You mean the listing agent?
I'm sorry, what is it?
Seller.
Listing agent. So I want the protection. I want the guidance. I don't want them. I want to get my own.
Yep.
I'm okay with paying it. Right. I think that that's going to be the vast majority of scenarios, situations. And maybe there's a point here on the table for negotiation and such.
Yep.
My solution.
Let me hear the Mooney solution.
Without talking to anyone, without even hearing this ever before. This is me. This is mine.
This is the Moolution.
mortgage companies
Yeah.
are going to offer the ability to put that commission into the mortgage?
I mean, I think that is genius. And I also agree. No one's saying anything yet because this is so fresh. The reason I think that may happen, I agree with Sean that I think mortgage companies would probably step up here. A couple different reasons. One, mortgage companies are pro-buyer. When you buy a house, the mortgage company has nothing to do with the seller. If anything, they're a thorn in the seller's side. We got to appraise the house. We need a month or two to get a mortgage. Like, I'm going to be a pain in your butt.
Yeah, if you have to pick sides.
Yeah. So mortgage companies are pro-buyer because the buyer chooses the mortgage company. The buyer is the one actually getting the mortgage to purchase the house. They're getting a loan is what they're getting. So I do think mortgage companies would benefit from helping buyers. Also goes back to my example, buyers traditionally don't have as much cash as sellers do, especially once they sell. So I think financing buyer agent commissions would be super helpful to the buying community. I think it's good for mortgage companies. I think the sellers already got their choice. They already have their protection through all this. I mean, I think it would be a triple win. There's some red tape like FHA and VA. VA is a veteran program. FHA is usually beneficial to like first-time home buyers. Yeah. They have certain rules in place right now where they don't want buyers to pay buyer agent commissions, which sounds ridiculous, but they do. They're more the minority of loans in the country. Most of the loans are done on the conventional side, which is like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They're the two big beasts that support like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Guaranteed Rate, like all these companies, Cross Country Mortgage. So I do think mortgage companies stepping up, offering to finance buyer commissions would allow buyers to get the protection that they want or they choose to have. They can still work with the listing agent if they want to, but they wouldn't have to come out of pocket for it. In the event the seller says, I'm not paying. If I'm not paying, who's it coming from? It's coming from you. And you're like, well, maybe I can make it work and work with the listing agent. I'm not saying you can't,
right?
But you might not be on the same level of protection of fiduciary if you do it that way. It's just a conflict. It goes back to that attorney example I made. And you can disagree with me all day. This is just an opinion. This is one man's opinion.
The other thing might be an opening or an avenue. I mean, years ago, it was very common, and I don't know what the math was behind it, but do you remember when like you'd buy a home with a first and a second?
Yeah.
Like I envision like, all right, you've got a 30-year mortgage.
Yep.
And then let's just call it 10 grand that you need to come up with to pay the buyer agent.
Yeah.
Why not have like a 10-year loan under this like second mortgage? It's going to like dwindle down over 10 years.
Yep.
And that way it's all financed. You know, you don't have to like come up with this additional 10 grand at settlement because you're probably moving things to get to the table anyway.
Yep.
But I think it's an opportunity, an opening for banks, mortgages, finance companies, whoever, to offer a product that would solve
to support buyers
that problem.
Well, and I think that is a phenomenal solution with you not being in the business, even having that idea. It's just,
we're going to put the phone number so people can call all the banks, mortgage companies.
Call Sean if you need some advice on buying, selling real estate.
No, I just want to do the financing.
Just the financing.
Just the financing.
No, dude, I think that is super insightful. And I personally think that'll probably happen because, again, it's good for buyers. It's good for mortgage companies. It's good for buyer agents. They're all looking out for the buyer.
Here's what happens. Real estate is just like insurance. They're slow moving, slow to adopt.
Very old industries.
But once someone does it and has success in doing it,
everyone jumps in.
Everybody's so quick to follow. Why don't we think of that?
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing this?
Yeah.
You know, so
true.
I think it's going to be an evolution. In looking at all of the opinions and everything online, the end result, I don't think there's going to be much change.
I mean, I personally don't think there's going to be a ton of change. I think if anything, the buying and selling public, people looking to sell real estate, people looking to buy residential real estate, people looking to buy and sell residential real estate, I think are actually going to learn more about the process. They're going to learn more about what their options are, and they're going to be able to make the most informed decision for them in that point of time that says, you know what, I'm better off going this way, that way, or maybe in between. And that's going to really be up to the buyer. So I think this is all going to be good. So again, you got any questions for us? You know where to find us. YouTube.
Real estate, Tim. Financing, Sean.
Yep. Check me out on LinkedIn. Check me out on social media. You got any questions, just ping me anywhere in the country. Anyone looking to get more information, happy to help. And that's all we have for this one, folks. So thank you for tuning in again to another episode of Bricks and Risk. See you soon. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Bricks and Risk. Our goal is that you walk away with 1 or 2 valuable nuggets, and we greatly appreciate you sharing your time with us today. You can find all BNR episodes on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcast content. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.